Welcome to the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod, and I am your host, Gary. And today we are back at the home base, recording, going over what's been going on in my world of G.I. Joe, and closing out with a look at the 1991 G.I. Joe Battle Wagon. So, the past couple weeks have really been about me reorganizing and downsizing. After working on the 3 Terrordromes and making 2 out of all the parts, it had finally become time to part ways with one of them. And actually on my agenda for tomorrow is to start boxing one up. I sold it to a friend and I'm happy to get it off into a new home. Also, I went through, as the easiest way to make room is to get rid of the big stuff first. I was able to unload one of my Sky Strikers, my Phantom X19, and currently, hoping to move a couple more smaller pieces, as well as my still in box G.I. Joe Pit from 2009. These things have, for the most part, just been taking up room, and it's too much for display. I'm not playing with them as much as I thought I would. However, to have 2 in case I need something, a pair for a picture, that is one thing. But when you're army building 26-inch long planes, that becomes a space issue. And when you cohabitate a building with others, you have to be considerate of that. That is only the right thing to do. With all that stuff moving out, hasn't left me too much time to look at what's going on in the world of Joe. And for the most part, other than the Super 7 official out-of-box reveal from a couple of days ago, again, I'll reiterate, I'm happy they exist, but I am absolutely not their target market. The G.I. Joe comic book comes out on Wednesday, and I am looking forward to reading that spotlight issue of Storm Shadow. The previews that Tom Waltz has shown on social media look killer, but it looks like, from the standpoint of what Larry Hama is writing, write what you know, and that man knows Vietnam warfare like only a vet would, and so I am really looking forward to delving into that in a few days. With that out of the way, the other stuff going on was I looked at my bureau, and my bureau in my bedroom is like my little man corner that I see every day. I have my man cave basement, aka the pit, but I don't go into my basement every day to escape. It's just not something I do. I'm trying to get there. The reason I'm not going down there enough because there's not enough space, because there's too much stuff. So we've been working as a family on reducing the amount of stuff in our domicile. With that, I'm upstairs and I'm starting to rearrange my display. Now, I have a beautiful Snake Eyes piece by Paul Gorey. It's Snake Eyes version 4, leaping into action with like a face of Storm Shadow in the background, like looking alarmed. A little, I would say, Rob Liefeld-esque in the portrayal. However, Snake Eyes does have his feet. And underneath that were my G.I. Joe classified collection. I'm looking at it, and it's great because they're all in little hero poses on the shelf, which is about 4 inches above my bureau, and it looked good. And then underneath them, the little gap, and then you have my bureau top, which serves as the place where I keep my laptop and like a couple things. On the left side, I have my Marvel Legends, and I also have some other toy lines. I have Mulder and Scully from the X-Files line. my 2017 ROM figure, my 2017 Cobra Commander, and Chuckles from the 50th anniversary. That side is cool. I like that side. It's really tight. That's where my comic book people are. I do have some Walking Dead figures that I'm going to eventually display, and I'm thinking down here in my basement, because they're Lucille Patrol, which is Python Patrol, or the Shiva Force, which is a parody of Tiger Force, which is really cool. And I've heard through the grapevine Robert Kirkman is a fan of the G.I. Joe brand. He even parodies Cobra in his Invincible comic book. I can't recommend, as comics go, he's definitely done some good books. So I have that, and I'm looking at my display, and I have some other, a couple Transformers on the right hand side, opposite the other shelves, because it's kind of near a window, so they're sitting on my bureau. And I'm looking at all the space, and I'm looking at how big these 6-inch figures are. And I'm thinking to myself, it's time to change it up. Right now, I'm in the middle of figuring out what I'm going to do. I have the Outpost Defender. I have the Watchtower. And right now, I'm still digging through stuff. I'm really thinking of a Bivouac in the background. And, and I've reached out on Twitter, and I've gotten everything from Awe Striker, Ram, Recon Sled, other things I can put into like a little mini scene, something that can, be on the top of my bureau. Because I do find myself grabbing, every so often the 3 3/4 figures. I do have some standbys always up there. I have an airtight figure that I'm always, playing with, and a couple Snake Eyes, and I'm just playing around with the display right now. So all my classified figures have been taken down and put back into boxes. As I'm doing this, I don't know where I am right now with classified, but as I was putting them back into their boxes, because the boxes take up as much room full as they do empty, I'm looking at the Red Ninja figure, and I'm like, for a guy that is based off of the early to mid 2000s Red Neo Viper, and you cannot convince me otherwise of that, it's actually really cool underneath all of that. There's still a ton of detail. He can hold a ton of weapons. I looked at him a little bit better. I'm still not a fan of the mask thing. I have a hand ninja next to my Daredevil Marvel Legends, and the hand ninja many people have bought multiples of as a different red ninja for Storm Shadow. Not gonna lie, it does work in that respect. I wanted to get back to a little bit about Terrificon, and one figure I forgot to mention was a 1983 Hitch Driver I picked up there. It's actually a funny story. Went to Terrificon was Saturday with my friends John and John from Pina Comics. We met up and we're walking around, and everybody's talking and have a good time. And they're over at Robber Barons Inc., makers of fine shirts. Unfortunately, I was getting a little ants in the pants, so I walked away to go to the bathroom. I'm coming back from the bathroom, and there's a vendor that had some vintage toys. I wanted to swing by and see him later in the day, but I'm wearing my Cobra Convergence 5 shirt while walking around the convention. And the guy says, "Hey, do you like G.I. Joe?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I'm like trying to figure out in my head, it's like, you got to be next level to recognize a Cobra Convergence t-shirt. But I'm like, yeah, I know. I love G.I. Joe. Hey, I'm your man. I'm your mark. What do you want? And he's like, "Hey, I got all these figures, and I just need to sort out which ones are less than 20 and more than 20. I'm like, okay. And he shows me this Ziploc bags filled with figures. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm starting going through. I'm like, yeah, this is that, and this is that. And I'm like, this guy's not prepared. He's like, yeah, I'm a Star Wars guy. I don't really collect Joe. And I'm like, dude, you don't collect Joe. You sell Joe. You're just a seller. And it's fine that you want to do this, but it's like, all right. So I go through, and in the meantime, my friends, they're like, where the heck is Gary? And I don't know this, but this is what they've told me. And I'm going through and I'm like, yeah, this guy, yeah, they're here. This guy's better than this. You should replace that with that. And I'm going through and I'm digging through. And then next thing you know, there's this box of blueprints and file cards. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I looked at him. It's like, you really need to match all these up. And he's like, well, I'm here at the show and I don't have time to do that now. And I'm like, all right, but just saying, like, some prep will go a long way. And we got through, and I'm like, all right, this is where we're at. And he's like, do you see anything you want? And I'm like, I'm looking through, and there's most of the stuff is early stuff. And I am really good on my G.I. Joe figure collection from 82 to 1990. Well, whatever you want, thank you for helping me out. Take a figure you want, I don't know what they're worth, but, just try not to take advantage of me. And I'm like, all right. So I'm going through, and I decided already I'm not going to go after anything with an O-ring in it. So I started going through his broken figures, and I picked out a Hiss driver with no logo on it, and I'm like, here, can I get this guy? And he's like, yeah, take that. And that's how I ended up with a Hiss driver with good joints, no cracked elbows, good knees, needed an O-ring. Actually, a really nice silver paint on the visor. Can't beat the price. It was 5 to 10 minutes after taking a wee. And what was even funnier was they're like, really, you stopped to look at G.I. Joe while we were talking. I'm like, oh, like, it's not a complete truth, but it's not a complete lie either. Also this week, I managed to get 3 more figures, 2 of them crossing ones I don't have off my list. It was Air Devil, a 1993 Crimson Guard Commander, and a version 2 Cobra Eels. I had the Cobra Eels before, but I didn't have a Crimson Guard Commander, and this one's loose, no accessories, and the Air Devil is a complete beater, but he fills the hole in my collection for the moment. It's just to be like, okay, now I know what to look for. And he's got paint wear and everything. The Crimson Guard Commander is plain worn, but not too bad. And the best thing I can say about the Cobra Crimson Guard Commander is they are the backup dancers to Disco Cobra Commander version 4. They have that big giant Cobra emblem that on their chest like Flavor Flav's clock. It's a little gaudy. It is such a product of the 1990s. It's cool in my book because when I was reading G.I. Joe as a comic book, it was the 90s. I wasn't an early reader of the comics. But that brings me to the version 2 Eels. Now, every so often, when I get a figure that's new to me, something about it just like says, I'm the one that you want to play with. I have 2 other version 2 Eels, and they're cool and all. They're really nice. One of them's absolutely complete. The other one's missing the shark missal, but the shark's complete. And they never say like, hey, play with me. And I don't know what it is. Just certain figures, the way they've aged, and I'm looking at this eel right now, and I'm seeing like, holy moly, his head fins have gotten beat on, which now makes me want to get a new head for him. I got him and I opened him out of the package. I was playing with him for a good 10-15 minutes, like taking pictures and stuff. And I don't know why. It's just like he spoke to me, and I don't know why some figures do that and some figures don't. I don't know. It's something that just speaks inside the figure that says, I'm cool. I mean, and in a version 2 Eels is gaudy. It is this bright yellow on blue, and it is not military at all, any way, shape, or form, unless you're talking deep sea diving where, you can't see anybody else unless you have something bright on because there's no light down there. I got a little more appreciation for the webbing or fins that run down from his waist all the way down his legs, down to the ankle. He's even got some fins on his upper arms to his wrists. I can see how that would be an advantage in the water. He's not like a Hydro Viper. And the red visor, trying to compete with the 1990s toy lines of the time, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There's something in there, and he's got the Cobra logo on his left upper arm, which is tasteful, which is probably the most tasteful thing about him. And I don't know why, I just playing with him right now as I'm talking about it. He's just something fun to pose and fun to play with, and he looks really cool on the side of my Hammerhead. It was a cheap, like, 3-figure lot. Out of the 3 figures, he's the coolest one, even though he was the one I least wanted. And that's this Cobra Eels. But and to go back on the whole thing, like figures that you play with and don't. A couple years ago, I was in a comic book shop, and they had this Raptor. I'm not going to say that I'm the biggest Raptor fan. I'm not. But he was just sitting there on a box of comics, and he's not in super mint condition, but he's in really nice shape. Very, very little paint wear. So it's like, okay, it's not perfect, but he's not all there. He doesn't. Well, Raptor's not all there anyway. But it's just him and his backpack and his wings, and the wings aren't torn. But he didn't have his bird with him. I'm looking at it, and I went up to the guy. I says, "Well, how much do you want for this G.I. Joe figure?" And this guy's like, "Where did you find it?" And I says, "Yeah, it was on that box of comics." He's like, "You want to just take it?" All right, works for me. And that worked out, because normally that comic shop is on the expensive side, and also let's look up the price at the register side off of eBay, because we don't know if our pricing's current, which is also a scummy comic book selling tactic. So I felt like, yeah, I finally got a deal. This Raptor, I kept him in my truck for like a week. Like, okay, Raptor's going to work today, and Raptor's going to Walmart today, and Raptor's going to Home Depot today. He was displayed on my bureau for a while. I saw him every day for about 6 months, and he's still well within reach down here in my pit. Pick him up, play with him, put him down, and move on. Like I said, some figures just speak more than others. I don't know why, but it's there. There's my avatar, Airtight, the pencil neck geek, the guy with the largest plastic dinosaur collection as a kid. He's just a given. I have 3 of them, and my worst one is the one I would play with all the time. Eventually, he's going to get all his gear too, and maybe, just maybe, I'll pull the broken peg that's in his foot out. I don't know what makes certain figures talk to me personally more. I can't put my finger on it, but there's just some essence about them, and it's not just like a moldy smell from somebody's basement or attic.
All right, boys, let's mop up this snake slop. Rolling into action, it's the battery-powered G.I. Joe Battle Wagon with motorized 4-wheel drive. The Battle Wagon's motorized gun shoots 8 rapid-fire missiles. The Battle Wagon's winch will bring the house down.
Yeah!
The G.I. Joe Battle Wagon. Figures and other vehicles sold separately. Batteries not included.
Well, now that I've rambled on for 20 minutes or so about essentially utter nonsense in relation to G.I. Joe, we're going to take a look at 1991's G.I. Joe Battle Wagon, a motorized vehicle from later in the line when motorized and just the general model aesthetic of the toys was phasing out. I love the Battle Wagon. My second monthly G.I. Joe comic was issue 129. And I mean monthly as in I got issue 128 and then went back to the same newsstand at the Groton sub base for issue 129. And on that cover is the Battle Wagon being manned by the Joe team in Barovia. And that left a mark. Now, over the course of the past few years, I went and I looked for Battle Wagons. And one thing that these always have in common is they're broken or they don't work, which is kind of the same thing. And then also, most of the time, it's untested, which I went on a rant about that a long time ago, but really don't buy from a seller that is too lazy to throw in some AA batteries or some C batteries and just say it doesn't power on or it makes a noise but nothing's happening. Well, with that out of the way, the G.I. Joe Battle Wagon is a 4-wheel drive truck. It uses 4C batteries like the 1985 Mauler, which makes it handy to have 4C batteries around. It has this dark gray plastic for the body and chassis that is screwed together with the electric motor that drives the 4 wheels underneath. Now, if you ever take it apart, you'll notice that the motor drives an axle, and the axle has 2 worm gears, which then go to the drive axles for the front and rear. Now, the front and rear drive axles are solid, and they all turn at the same time. And it's actually a pretty quiet operation. Here you go, if maybe you can hear this. Now, as electric toys go, that's really quiet. It is much quieter than my Galoob Animal from the 80s that is also an absolute monster 4-wheel drive. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the Battle Wagon. And the Battle Wagon seats, without the gunner, seats for, because the gunner station can come off, can be lifted off and set aside as a separate platform. So that would be the 5th figure. And there's also on the sides and back, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can fit upwards of 12 figures at one time. And that's saying only putting 1 figure in each side gun station. The blue plastic is rather soft, so it's easy for that stuff to get nicked and warped and just in general damaged. So finding these pieces in really nice condition can sometimes be a challenge. The rubber tires are really good. I had one of my play ones out a long time ago, and it conquered a lot of obstacles. Where the things start to get a lot more sketchy is the firing station. The first things up, we'll work away from bottom top, is there is a blue like crescent piece that flips out to provide stability. So when you take it out, you can put the machine, the Gatling gun on your ground. And that sometimes is lost. Then moving up, there is a little piece of plastic flap that works to the ratchet mechanism on the orange plastic housing for the gun. That is commonly broken, or at best commonly with a stress mark there. A lot of times all the weight goes on it. It's not exactly the best pivoting design. This is also the era, like I said, the engineering of the toy seems to be in decline, whereas, okay, that works, let's move on with our day, rather than, okay, that works, but is this going to last? And I don't think the lasting equation was asked much in these, based on how many I'm seeing that are broken over time. It could also be just the age of this dark green plastic that's going. And then finally, what also happens is the motor stops working. And it makes a really cool sound by using an electric motor, and then you put your 4 missiles in. The missiles just sit in there. They're not grooved. They're not spring-loaded, the missiles. However, inside the mechanism, there is a ratcheting hammer that, as it spins, it pulls back, and then that puts tension on a spring, which when it gets past the ratchet action, slams forward, and that launches the missile out, and it does a pretty good job. And also, it makes a really satisfying sound, too. It's really satisfying, playing with this toy when everything works. And this is also one of those toys, like the Mauler, that you unscrew the body, you get at that motor, create your 3 volts or 6 volts directly apply it to the motor. Make sure the motor's not burned out when you're diagnosing the problem. There's many of these where the motor is bad. I have one where the motor is bad. But there's many times where these connections just corrode after time and they need a little bit of soldering help. And it's a simple vehicle to fix, and just sometimes the parts are harder to find than anything else. Finding a working Gatling gun is, for me, the second hardest problem to conquer with this toy. It's mostly the biggest problem I have is with the ratcheting flap that the gun rests on. Now, being from 1991, this is going to use a later version of the G.I. Joe crew. Who is going to drive it? My first inclination is Cross Country V2. He is, at this point, 6 years from beyond piloting the Havoc, this, I think, would be the natural progression for him to move forward in the driver's canopy. He's a good old boy from the South, which is kind of problematic, the way they created him and the way they marketed him in the 21st century. But in 1992, he was, for many people, just a good old boy. And 4x4 lifted trucks is exactly what a guy like that would be driving. In the gunner seats, I can see any of the Joe team, any of the infantry team, Roadblock or Dusty or Flint in that spot. And then on the main gun, I would put Duke version 3, because instead of having him ride that little rocket, put him in there. And underneath that station is the radar station. That's a good place for psych out or sci-fi if I was building a 1990s team and using it with this truck. The Battle Wagon is a bit of a throwback, where it is not as futuristic looking. It definitely looks practical by being just a big truck, and it's toyetic because the gunner firing the Gatling gun, he's out in the open like older G.I. Joe toys. Instant target, sure, but it's a solid toy. I have a second one just for play, where the blue plastic isn't in the best shape. The winch, which I forgot to talk about earlier, isn't in the best shape. And in the winch, to go back to the winch as a side tangent, is fun and all, but the fact that this is actually a motorized toy, you're not going to use the winch to move him forward. You're probably going to spread that winch out, attach it to something where you're going to throw this guy in reverse and pull it down. So for destruction, that's how the winch, I would play with the winch as a kid. Using the winch to get up like a tall obstacle, not so much. Getting back, I do have a toy version of this. The only thing really wrong with my quote-unquote play one is it really needs a new motor for the Gatling gun, because that motor's blown. And I need to do a little more research and just procuring a replacement motor, because every time I see one of these Gatling guns for sale, not tested, or I put some batteries in it and it doesn't work, and I'm not too keen on buying one where I put the batteries in and it doesn't work, only to unscrew it, tear it apart, and determine if the battery is alive or dead, and just bypass all the wiring. And I have played with this guy outside, and they roll over everything. It is so much an outdoors toy. It's crazy. It's crazy good. To me, it is a 5 general star vehicle. I think anybody who loves G.I. Joe, even if they love the early stuff, this has a place, even with the giant orange Gatling cannon on top. And that's it for this episode of the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod, a division of the Pina Comics family, as these twin lawyers from Extensive Enterprises have told me to tell you. You can find them at pinacomics.com. Also, if you just want to get a hold of me or follow me on social media, that is at Chaplain Joe Pod on Twitter and Instagram. Also, you can leave a review on any of your podcatchers. That's great for getting the podcast out. You can also email me with questions, comments, concerns, or just plain randomness at iggaryv@gmail.com. With that, we're out, and we have missiles to deliver to the masses.